Good evening. My name is James Butler. I'm the campaigns officer for the Co-operative Party. And so much welcome to the members' meetup on sustainable communities. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are a universal call to action to end poverty, to protect the planet and to improve the lives and prospects of everyone everywhere around the world, from big industrialized nations to small communities. Shortly, we'll be hearing from Barry Shearman MP, Councillor Claire Penny-Evans, the Cabinet Lead for Climate Change and Communities, and Vice Chair of Climate Committee at the Newcastle Council, from Chris Shaw from Huddersfield Sustainable Town, one of the principal members there, and from Councillor Johnson Situ, the Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency Planning and Transport at Southwark Council. But before I kick off with those speakers, there's a few technical things in terms of running the meeting via Zoom. Firstly, this Zoom meeting will be recorded. Many of our members can't access Zoom, but do log on afterwards and watch the videos. So if you're eating your dinner, you're in your pajamas, or for any other reason you don't want your image to be seen, please remove yourself from the video and go to audio only. To make the content of the call clearer, you've been muted. Only those speaking will be shown on the screen or have their sound enabled. Following the presentation, we'll hold a Q&A session. There are 3 ways you can ask a question. Number 1, if you click on the icon labelled participants at the bottom of the centre of your PC or phone, and then click on the button raise hand, your digital hand will magically appear and we'll be able to pick you out from there. Secondly, post your question in the chat box. Or thirdly, if you can't manage either of those, if you email us at events@party.coop, that inbox is being monitored and my colleague Izzy will forward your question to me. And when it's time to ask your question, I will introduce you and you'll be then unmuted. And now over to our first speaker, who is Barry Shearman, if I can find him on the list. And if you can join us, Barry.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you crystal clear, Barry.
And can you see me? Hang on.
Yes, we can.
You can, excellent.
We have Barry Cam. I'll leave you to it.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here on Zoom. I think this is my 7th Zoom today, but this is the best one. We've saved it to the end of the day. And it's all my, in part, me being here, my own fault, because I'm very passionate about sustainable communities. And as I think most people here tonight on this Zoom call will realise that I've been a Labour and Co-operative Member of Parliament for a hell of a long time. But I've never left my background behind me in terms of my commitment to cooperation and of course to the Labour Party. But you will probably not know that one of my earliest ventures into cooperative action, when I knew little about the cooperative movement, I had this idea to start worker co-ops in South Wales when I was a university lecturer at Swansea University. So my very first sally into corporations was worker co-op. And so and then at some stage, and I'm told many cooperated this a few times, someone in Swansea said, "You're interested in co-op. Why don't you come to a meeting of the Cooperative Party in the Elysium buildings near the station tomorrow night?" And it was Swansea, it was pouring with rain, and the 2 of us got into the Elysium building and I went to my first Cooperative Party meeting and I came out secretary. And I've been involved in the bigger co-op movement and the retail cooperative movement for a long time too. But I've never lost that passion for making things happen at the grassroots. And a number of years ago, I was invited to get involved with a World Health Organization a committee, a global committee on transport safety. And I suddenly realized that the importance of the framework I was working in. And I said, look, this is very good. It's got focus, it's got discipline, and it's called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And for years, I've been campaigning on this and I've been campaigning on that. But suddenly I discovered this wonderful discipline that was created just a few years ago, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, Chris Shaw is going to say a bit more about it. The reason I fell in love with it and why it drives much of what I do today and why I believe that the cooperative movement meshing in with sustainable development goals can be a really revolutionary kind of step for all of us in terms of raising the level of activity, interest, and success of our movement. Now, can I just say that, first of all, I believe when you're a member of parliament, you should anyway be always looking long-term at the future of your town. And Huddersfield is very lucky in this, not just having me as the MP, but it is the typical town of Britain. Now, if I say it's the average town, everyone in Huddersfield gets really upset and says, we're not average, Barry. We almost, we're in the Premiership for 2 seasons recently, and we have a university, and we are very special. But a lot of people, if you look at the data, Huddersfield is a microcosm of the rest of the UK in terms of employment, unemployment, people working in the manufacturing sector, about 10.5%, that's the national average, ethnicities, the mix, about the national average. And so it is a town very often used to launch new products and test new ideas. And I have been trying over these last 2 years to get a group of people together, partly political people, partly local business people, the university, but a range of people in the community to say, look, if we're going to try and make this country of ours sustainable, we've got to start at grassroots. And it's all very well when people come to me and I go to schools and they say, Mr. Chairman, and I was the person that first invited Greta Thunberg into Parliament. And what a pleasure it was to meet that inspirational young lady. But when I go into my constituency schools and colleges and say, well, come on, I'm not Greta Thunberg. How do I start? And in a sense, the answer is start a bit like her, sitting outside you're in the street with a placard. But more than that, why not try and make your community sustainable? One of the problems in most constituencies and most towns is that we as political activists tend to think in terms of wards. Now, wards are only bureaucratic lines on the map. And if I say to people in the centre of Huddersfield, someone who lives in Kirkheaton or lives in a Mould Green, that's a real community that people understand. If I tell them that they don't know you live in Dalton, they'll be very offended. That is not what makes them feel they are part of that community. And so what we've tried to do in Huddersfield is, first of all, to reach down to the real communities that as local as you can get, and then engage people and schools and, of course, primary schools. Now the Conservatives have got rid of Sure Start and the basic units of where we were trying to build from the grassroots up in terms of preschool education. The nearest you can get to a community in a kind of structure is primary schools. It's absolutely vital. It's about the closest you can get very often. It used to be the library before so many of them were abolished, but primary schools are important. Again, grassroots community. And then if you look at an overall constituency or town or city, you have to get all the partners together. What I like about the Sustainable Towns initiative is that we take the Sustainable Development Goals and they give you the structure. They give you the rigor to say, if you want to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of energy, in terms of what we deal with our waste in our community, what we do with recycling, what we do with transport, buses, taxis, cycling, pedestrians, every bit. What do we do about health and well-being? As Chris, after me, will explain the broader framework and how many categories that there are. They can be complex and confusing. What we did when we in Huddersfield said we're going to have we're going to make this, we're going to try and make it a sustainable town, and we're going to do it by trying to meet all the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. We also said, what do you think? Yeah, this is up there. What do you think? We'll show you in a simplified fashion what the goals are. What do you think? How do you think in your community believe that you could make a real difference in the sustainability of your local community? And what do you prioritize? And so we had a very successful questionnaire open to everyone. And we put it online, we put it in different forms. But what we did was engage the local community, absolutely vital. And of course, we all know that in the cooperative movement. When you stood in Castle Hill in Huddersfield many years ago, there were 54 co-ops that you could see. So we know working people wanting to control their lives, invented cooperation. What I think the challenge is today is to take that cooperative vigor and faith in local communities and apply it to sustainability. And to do that, just like co-ops in their origin, you have to engage the local community in a meaningful way. You haven't got to petrify everyone by saying, I'm not Greta Thunberg, I can't do climate change, I can't do it all on my own. You've got to give people the ability to roll up their sleeves and say, I can do something in my life, in my community, in my street. Indeed, I think the first phase of COVID showed that community spirit. When we clapped at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night and we were all in it together, I hope we can get that spirit back a bit in this second dark winter that we're facing. But, that is the spirit we need to tackle sustainability long term. And so the other thing I just want to explain before I hand over is that the working parties that you have will be only as good as the quality of the people you attract. And you need a working party on health and well-being. You need a working party on business and manufacture. You need a working party on all the things on energy. You want a working party, or perhaps on energy and waste in our case. You want a working party on transport. One on homes and housing and sustainable building. That is up to you locally to say which ones you prioritize, but going out there, getting the right people working together. And I'll give you an example. Because we understand in the Huddersfield Sustainable Town Group, we now know that we are going to be not only facing a tough, hard winter, we're likely to see high levels of unemployment, youth unemployment particularly, but many people losing their jobs, lost their employment. And we are launching in a couple of weeks a new enterprise and learning foundation, but all in a green context. So anyone who wants to start a new business, a startup in the green economy, we will put together senior business people, the university professor, the right kind of expertise to say, we can help you. Do your pitch. We'll see if we can mentor you. We will see if we can help you with the business plan and so on. And at the same time, we're trying to knit together the local FE college, the university. I know everyone hasn't got a university. We're just privileged that way in Huddersfield, but you know what I mean. Huddersfield's Kirklees College, the local schools. You can get a unit round that is meaningful in terms of having the expertise to give advice. So every community will be different, but the principle is very important. You engage people at the local community, you find out where the talents are and you use them. and you inspire them with the rigor of developing a sustainable development set of goals. Now, what I like about it is this is grassrooting. It is doing it in partnership with other groups. And there will always be people that in the early days will come in and sniff around and think they might get a bit of an advantage out of a new organisation. And you just have to be careful, to be broad, be welcoming, to be open to all the talents. Be a little careful, because there are certain groups that will come in and sort of try and claim everything for their own, but that's just politics, isn't it? So you need that thrust, you need that ambition, but you need the rigour. So I believe that my cooperative principles, with my passion for sustainability and my passion for education, marry in this sort of project. I believe
if you don't mind,
working together, we can do this in every town, every constituency, every community in the country.
Thank you, Barry. Sorry to interrupt you there towards the end.
You didn't. I was finished.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. If you could stay on for questions, that would be fantastic. And now we move very smoothly on to Chris Shaw, who is one of the principal members of Huddersfield Sustainable Town. So it segues very nicely. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the very kind introduction, James, and thank you for inviting me as well, of course. And thank you also to Barry for the marvellous snapshot that he's just given of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also how Huddersfield is hoping to use them and leverage and interface with them as well. I'm going to be reasonably brief about this because I think Barry's covered a huge amount of detail there. He's also sort of reminding me of how wonderful my hometown is from the point of view of being so many different communities all coalescing and integrating together, and also this kind of friendly rivalry that we see within the communities from the point of view that, sort of those which are, contiguous and adjacent with each other, then you don't want to call Mole Green Dalton and so on and so forth. So with that respect, then I think it's kind of very, very important to, as Barry was mentioning, try and get very much to the grassroots level and make sure that the goals that we are aiming for and the engagement that we're hoping with in the community is as local as possible and gets the right stakeholder groups. So what I'll do now is I'll just try and sort of share my screen if I can, and I'm very much sort of hoping that if I do so, you'll be able to see a few slides that I've got. So I'm hoping therefore that we're okay, that you can see those slides there, if that's all right. So I'm hoping that's a yes. So just to give a bit of a sketch and a snapshot of what we're doing in Huddersfield. Altogether, in the UN's Sustainable Development Goals working priorities, then we've got 17 different goals. What we've chosen to do in the initial stages is to highlight 6 of those. We actually started with 5, and then as Barry was saying, then we've had feedback and we've had information from a lot of local groups, and we decided to increase that to 6 because we feel that works very, very neatly and very, very well together. So the ones that we're focusing on just for the moment, which then allow us to expand and to continue into the others, so that over the next sort of several years and perhaps the next decade, then we tackle and address each of them in turn. So the ones that we're looking at are the ones listed on the left there, the priority goals that we've highlighted. So we've got good health and well-being, we've got quality education, affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and of course climate action as well, which is an overriding consideration that we have there for that. So what we've identified is that it will be useful and beneficial for us to have 5 working groups within our Huddersfield Sustainable Development Town. So we've got business and manufacturing, and those numbers that you see after there are the particular priority goals that those relate to. So we've got number 4, quality education, number 12, the consumption and production. We've got environment, which is 7, 12, 13, health and well-being, numbers 3 and 11, transport and energy, number 7 and 11. So you can see that 11 with the sustainable cities and communities goal is quite a significant one there. And then the group, the final group, and I'm hoping last but not least, comms and culture. And what we're saying there is that that works across all the groups and the goals. And that's the one that I'm heading up actually, because I think I mentioned to one or two of you before we started that I'm actually a commercial lawyer by trade, but having said that, more recently then I'm working a lot in comms in terms of local authorities, quangos, government groups and parties, and for larger organisations as well. So I have an overriding interest in ensuring that each of the groups sort of keeps to our comms messages that we are looking at and that we are hoping to prioritise. So the next little one that we'll move towards is benchmarking. So how are we doing this? What we've done is we've looked already at three projects that are being undertaken, and those are in Bristol, where we've done voluntary local reporting, which is an ongoing process as part of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We've also looked at Sheffield for local authority research, and Liverpool as well, which is good from the point of view that they're doing a partnership with business, which is looking towards having a workable business hub addressing each of the Sustainable Development Goals in the next decades. We're also looking at research and how we localise the various different SDGs. And that includes things like case studies and so on. And we've also benchmarked via social media. And social media is one of the things that I'm heading up as part of my comms overarching sort of interests within the Huddersfield Sustainable Town. So that includes polls, graphics, videos, and so on. The roadmap that we are working with includes raising awareness, the diagnostics of where we are when we're initialising the process, and also our strategic plan, which then leads towards the monitoring, evaluation, and also those voluntary local reviews, which we are hoping to do on an annual basis. And then towards the end, what we've got is we're looking at the strategy and the planning around the whole of the project. And this is as we're developing, as we're moving along. So first of all, we want to define the vision of what is going in Huddersfield and what Huddersfield will look like in the next decade. So those are initiatives that we're working with each of those working groups, those working parties that we identified, and working across the culture and the comms working group to make sure that we're delivering appropriately what the population of Huddersfield and those various stakeholders, including the business community, are looking for and wanting. By defining the specific projects, we're bringing together those priorities, we're getting together our framework, and also sort of spanning the working parties. The final point I want to make there, of course, is the direct reference to the point that Barry was making, that we've got in the offing a Huddersfield Green Enterprise Foundation. Now, I think that one of the things that Barry didn't actually admit to when we were doing the wonderful introduction was that he was one of the prime movers with the original Huddersfield Enterprise Foundation, which was incredibly successful many, many years ago. And that actually spawned quite a number of businesses, some of which are still kind of continuing to this day. So by relaunching and putting a green aspect on it, then what we're hoping is that we can get sort of worthy, new and young, and also eager to expand businesses and bring those into the Huddersfield Sustainable Town group and help lift the positive aspect of the town as a whole. So finally, by raising awareness and engagement in the town and in those various different sort of stakeholder groups, then we're hoping to target our businesses, our communities, our council, of course, and we have buy-in already from Kirklees Council, which is very, very rewarding indeed. We want to remain independent to the council, but still work alongside the council, of course, and I think that benefits both their goals and our goals as well, that we don't necessarily have something which is really absorbed by the council. So the key messages and aims are those which we are looking at sort of sustaining, as mentioned, by using the 3 points of environment, social and economic. And that brings together, as you'll see from the Venn diagram on the right-hand side, the totality of things being equitable, viable, bearable, and hence sustainable as well. So what I will do is I'll come out of the screen share then. And thank you for your time. If you've got any sort of queries and questions, then I noticed that 1 or 2 hands have been raised. I think we'll sort of address those via the chair at a later point as we're moving along. But if you want to have access to these particular slides, then they should be in the video, which I hope that that we're going to be able to share shortly as well. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Chris. Our next speaker is Councillor Claire Penny-Evans, the Cabinet Lead for Climate Change, Communities and Vice Chair of the Climate Committee in Newcastle City Council. Claire, if you could unmute yourself, that would be
done that.
Fantastic. Fire away.
Thanks. And I promise this was not a setup, but I actually went to Huddersfield University, so I recognise all the towns that Chris and Barry were talking about. So I don't think anybody knew that when they invited me this evening. So there was a nice little flow through there as well. So yes, good evening, everybody. So I am a portfolio holder for climate change and communities at Newcastle City Council. The community aspect that I do is really around community safety, and I'm chair of Safe Newcastle. So that's all about keeping people safe. But I think it does link as well into engaging with communities as part of our climate change. So we had declared a climate emergency in 2019. And part of our pathway to achieving what we declared was to set up a climate convention. So our climate convention is aiming to get us to be net zero by 2030, which is obviously really ambitious and ahead of the government's targets. But we feel that local authorities are really leading the way on this. And I think as local authorities, each of us can do our bit and work with our communities and really engage with our communities who we know are really enthusiastic about this, to maybe help the government achieve its goal as well in the 2030. So in doing our climate convention, we had to look at how are we going to get to our path? How are we going to get to our vision of being net zero, a net zero city? So we set about setting up a climate change committee, which is a cross-party committee within the local authority. And that listens to evidence from experts, from residents, from stakeholders. And one of the things we did was we did a call for evidence. We put out a plea to everybody in our city, because we know that we've got experts within our city. We know that we've got people who are really enthusiastic, who've got lots of knowledge, and we wanted them to share their ideas, share their ambitions, share their knowledge with us to see what they wanted us to, what ways they thought we could do to get to net zero. We then pulled all of that information together and held a climate summit. And looked at the documentation, pulled it into some key themes. And from that, we've also pulled together something called a net zero action plan. So our climate convention has 3 strands to it: the climate committee, which did the call for evidence. We have a net zero task force, and that net zero task force, I think, is quite unique in the fact that it brings together all of our anchor institutions within our city. So we are in the position where our hospital trust was the first hospital trust in the country to declare a climate emergency. So they're really on board, they're really engaged in our net zero task force. They've got a climate action plan themselves. So I'll try and send a link through to someone about that. They've got a great video on what they're doing as a hospital trust. So they're part of our net zero task force. We've also got 2 universities in our city, and one of the universities has also declared a climate emergency. That's Newcastle University. But the other university, Northumbria, and our local college group are also part of our net zero task force. We've also got businesses, we've got our transport, our airports involved, our voluntary sector, our utility companies and representatives, and we've got trade unions. So we all come together as a task force to look at what we can do to share the challenges and our ambitions, and to sort of share good practice. And this is really key, I think, because it's about pooling that knowledge and working together and seeing about the fact that there are new ways we need to work in new different ways. We need to make sure that we can do things, share our ideas and our good practice. So we're looking at things like sharing our energy resources, looking at jointly commissioning. So I think that's quite a unique position that we're in there. And we're all working together to try and get to our net zero by 2030. The third strand of our climate convention is the Citizens' Assembly. And the Citizens' Assembly is something that we've decided to do at a North of the Tyne level. So we've unfortunately had a little bit of a delay with COVID through our Citizens' Assembly. So we're looking at what we can do about that. And from the Citizens' Assembly, we'll hopefully get some net zero champions as well that will be able to push the cause around into our communities. So I mentioned before our net zero action plan, and we produced this document. And one of the keys, I think, for us is that although we've produced a document now and it's a strategy and it's a pathway to getting to net zero, it's not a static document. It's not something that we're just going to produce, put it on a shelf and never look at it again. It actually needs to be a fluid document, because over time we know that new technology will come on board, there's new ideas might come up, and as we're working along that pathway, we might find that we need to go faster on certain avenues, or we might have, it's a very fluid document, but it helped us to identify where our key emissions were in our city. So we know that our big three emissions are our transport, energy and housing, and also energy in terms of the way that we work and our businesses. So we knew that we could identify where our emissions is, where our carbon footprints were, in order for us to be able to see what we can do to tackle that. Our key themes for our net zero action plan are energy, transport, adaptation and sustainability. But I think it's still key to mention that we know that this is not something that a city council can do by itself. We know this is not just something we can do with our key anchor institutions. We know that this involves every single person within our city to be able to help us to get to this point. So that's why we are trying to make sure that we're engaging. And I think that's a slight barrier in the fact that COVID has had slight restrictions. We had a youth climate conference planned. We've had to look at what we're going to be doing around that. But we do know that we've got some pledges that we want people to sign up to. And I think this is really important for me. It's about really sort of bringing people together and, building and raising awareness and getting people to see the opportunities that they've got to change, but also not to be putting on change on them. I think, like what Barry said earlier on, you've got to bring people with you, and people have got to see what they can do and what changes they can make in order for you to actually get these changes into being. So we've got some pledges that we've designed. We've got a youth pledge, we've got a resident pledge, and we've got a businesses pledge. But I think one of the key barriers, I was asked certain questions around this, and one of the key barriers to all of this has been about making sure this is a just transition that we're looking at, and that this isn't just one group of voices speaking in our city, that it's about all of the members of our city feeling that they can be involved. And I think for us as well, we're trying to embed this into our leadership team and into all of our services. So we have now sustainability and climate change in our procurement. We have it in our housing portfolio. It's in our transport. We've got targets in our transport portfolio. We've got air quality. It's in our recycling and our waste management. It's in our social care and in our schools. It's in everything that we do, that we've got this in part of our targets and our goals. And I think for me as well, it's about ensuring that people know that they can play their part, whether that's within a cooperative approach of doing something in their local area, in their neighbourhood. in their school, in their city, and building in their ward area or in their little part of our town, and building into the bigger picture and bringing them together along with us for that. I think I was asked what would be the barriers around COVID-19, and some of the barriers COVID-19 has put in place is that, like I said, we haven't been able to meet. We've been able to do virtual things, but we haven't been able to meet up and do some of the big conferences that we planned, or the Citizens Assembly that I mentioned. But actually, it's really been an opportunity in terms of greenery and getting people engaged, because people can see that they can go about their lives with the changes that have happened, such as lower transport, less traffic. You know, it's not the end of the world that you're working from home at times. We've got the chance to be able to, people have been able to see what it's like in their communities with low traffic neighborhoods. People have been able to understand what it's like to be able to have greenery around them more. People have really I think people have really appreciated that access to green space. But it's also highlighted those inequalities as well. You know, those people who haven't been able to access a garden, those people who are in areas where there isn't a park or anywhere to be able to go and be able to exercise, and those real poverty inequalities around, you know, our health inequalities, because climate change is really important in terms of our health as well, in the air that we breathe, in our access to what we are talking about as well, about access to parks to keep us fit, to keep us healthy, our green spaces. And for us as well, you know, when we talk about energy, we're also talking about fuel poverty and how some of the issues that we can develop around access to heat pumps or green energy networks, how can they also tackle poverty and fuel poverty, just as when we talk about food and sustainability around food, how can cooperatives around food tackle food poverty? So I think for us, it's about looking at how it all interlinks and how it all plays together. And it's actually heightened our ambition and made us really want to move forward probably faster than we were before. We've got some really exciting things that we're doing. We're talking about a 15-minute neighborhoods, you know, the fact that you should be able to access everything you need within 15 minutes of where you live, some low traffic areas. But, you know, for us to reach this ambitious target, we have got to have people to really do some key things around, you know, reducing their waste, recycling, but also looking at sustainable travel plans, looking at energy usage, you know, even retrofitting some of our homes. You know, it's a big ambition we've got, but I hope I've given you a little bit of insight. I can't see a clock in front of me, so I don't know. This is a subject that I could actually talk about for absolutely ages, because it's so massive. It covers all of our lives. So I hope I've just given you a brief aspect of something that we've been doing.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm going to bring in Councillor Johnson-Situ in just 2 seconds. But one thing I'd just like to say, we've got a pretty even gender balance of people watching, and yet we've only had one question from a woman come through. So don't hesitate. If you're a woman, you will get your question asked. So please fire away. I don't want this to be question after question from people who look like me. Please.
Hello. Thank you, James. And I was trying to wrap my brain in my connection to Huddersfield, since it was a bit of a theme that was going through. Well, if I had been to Huddersfield, so I guess that's probably the best we're going to get in this day. But yeah, so I'm Councillor Johnson-Situ, Cabinet Member for the Climate Emergency Planning and Transport in Southwark. And much of what I'm going to say has also been mentioned by both Barry, Chris and Claire, so I'm not going to echo too much of it. But to give you a context, Southwark is in the heart of London, about 300,000 people. It's a real mix in respect of significant number of council homes. We're really proud of being one of the largest landlords across the UK, actually, and we're really proud of the fact that it's got strength in its diversity, and really proud of the fact that it's a nice mix as well. But there are also some challenges. It's fair to say that there are pockets of deprivation, as you'll see right across the country. There are challenges in both terms of childhood obesity and other areas as well, all of which we are committed as a Labour administration to address, and also reduce health, housing and income inequality in its wider sense. So in respect of that as a context, our commitment to responding to the climate emergency has always been about how do we ensure that we're also reducing inequalities as part of that mission as well. And how do we do it? I'm also a cooperative member. How do we do that in a way that draws on the strengths of our communities and draws on the strength of the cooperative values and the wider community as well? So for us, to give you a picture of where we've got to, we declared a climate emergency in and around the same time as Newcastle, actually, in March 2019. And similarly, we declared our commitment to getting to net zero by 2030. And again, we've had over the last year developed an ambitious programme, but also through collaboration with our communities, whether it be through our climate conference, which we had earlier this year, and also through our partnership steering group, we've developed the strategy to be able to get to net zero by 2030. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But we know as a council, we have to lead from the front on this, but we are not, we cannot address this alone. As a council, we probably account for about 14% of carbon emissions in the borough. So yes, that's a sizable figure, but you will probably work out that, and you don't have to be a maths wizard to work out that the vast majority is through other institutions, and also through domestic, and also domestic heating and hot water, and the built environment and transport as well. So I see our role as a local authority to, yes, absolutely ensure that we have the strategies in place, the action plan in place, but also to draw on our wider movement through the community organisations, through drawing on the best of the talent in the borough to be able to get to net zero moving forward. And how we've categorised this is through three key areas. So firstly, we've identified our focus on people. Now, I think it's really important to stress that actually we know that, and the SDGs talks about this as well, a focus on making sure that through addressing fuel poverty, working together to bring forward innovative ideas like community energy provision, and also working forward in terms of bringing forward innovative ideas as the green recovery and green renewal jobs. How are we linking our response to the climate emergency to ensuring that we're demonstrably making a difference to our communities' lives? And how are we doing that together with our communities? So that's a really important part of our strategy on our action plan. The second part is place. Now, anybody that's looked at the climate emergency will identify that part of a key contributor to carbon emissions is both the built environment, but also the built environment can play a key role in providing sustainable, and I really welcome Chris's presentation, sustainable solutions to not just responding to climate emergency, but also creating the neighborhoods and creating the places that we want to live. Places where, as Claire's talked about, we also have a commitment to the 15-minute city or 15-minute area where you can get everything you want within a short distance, but also places which you promote healthy, active travel, places that are friendly to families, where it's a place that you want to grow up in, and a place that is also friendly to also older residents and residents of all backgrounds as well. So ensuring that the sense of place is at the heart of our strategy is also a key part of both our strategy and our action plans moving forward. And then the final part of that, so, you know, first the people, then the place, and the final part is the planet. And really ensuring that we are promoting our biodiversity, our firm commitment on planting trees, our firm commitment on our ecology, our wider ecology, our firm commitment on promoting wildlife more generally, and our firm commitment on looking at both our food cycle and also the wider circular economy as well. All of these parts are key areas within our climate strategy and also our climate action plan. And I'll end on these couple notes. I think in true cooperative values, we are under no illusions that we can, you know, we can do it ourselves. So we've developed a number of areas moving forward that we will be actively working with our communities. So drawing on the expertise within the borough, we will seek to have both an advisory panel, but also one that brings together key anchor institutions on this agenda, brings together hospitals, brings together our universities, brings together also large employers as well. We're calling them citizens' juries, but we will also want to draw on the strengths of our citizens to be able, from all walks and backgrounds of life, to be able to say, well, how can we do this together? How do we do this in a socially just way? And how do we do this in a way that creates the structures so that we can get to net zero by 2030? And we're really, really looking excited by the citizens' jury, because in as much as it will help us develop the action plan, we also see it as a key part of our work to monitor and also tap into the innovative solutions moving forward as well. Some of the best ideas that we've seen in Southwark over recent years and over decades have come from the wider cooperative values and cooperative movement. This year, we're celebrating the centenary anniversary of the election of Ada Salter as the mayor of Bermondsey, the first woman mayor of Bermondsey. And she had a really radical vision and idea to plant 7,000 trees, but to also to do it to reform the slums at the time, and also to ensure that we're improving the housing conditions of communities in Bermondsey and the wider Southwark at the time as well. But what she knew, and what we're trying to tap into at the moment as well, is that through her committee, she brought together both the private sector, citizens, charity organisations, and wider institutions as well. And so that's an approach that we will be taking forward in the centenary anniversary as well. So there's lots to do, and we recognise that, you know, like Newcastle, like Huddersfield as well, we cannot have a static document, we cannot have a static plan. It needs to evolve, and it needs to be reflective of values and tap into the wider citizens in our communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's Councillor Johnson City, the Cabinet Member for Climate, Emergency Planning and Transport and Southwark Council. Now, I've got about 5 or 6 questions. What I intend to do is throw them all at you, and then in order of speaking, you have an opportunity to pick and choose which questions you want to ask rather. The first person I'm going to try and bring in is Val Woodward. So if you could unmute yourself, Val, and then we'll bring in Cynthia, Norman Rimmel, Christopher Lovell, Malcolm Wallace. And if you could try and keep your questions short and sweet, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. This is great, and I'm just delighted to be here. It's something I'm fascinated by. But I think it's really important that we don't just work locally, but we work in collaboration nationally, internationally, etc., etc. And you haven't mentioned Plymouth, and because I live in Plymouth, I'm very offended. So I thought I'd better make sure that Plymouth's mentioned. We've got Co-op Council, Co-op MP, and we're doing wonderful things. Anyway, apart from that, my main interest, which is something we discuss in Plymouth, is how easy it is to get stuck with imagining communities can help us, not myself, I'm not a councillor, but us as the Labour Party in council and in Parliament do things, and forget to start where people are at, start where the communities are at. And often communities can feel exploited. And some of what we talked about, yes, got onto that. So my question is, I'd like to know more about what the speakers feel we can do about merging the idea of working at a local level with families and at community level with politics, the more structural changes that are needed. I could go on for ages, right? I'll shut up. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, brilliant. Cynthia, can I bring you in quickly?
Yes, my question was a bit rambly, so I'll be very quick. Learning lots, and thank you. But I was asking myself, because I've come across this before, why we're looking at UN Sustainable Development Goals when the Millennium Development Goals were about how aid would be targeted to enable developing countries to catch up. And that's not a task that's completed. There's still lots of people that don't have access to clean water. But also, if we're going to do climate change, we've got to do it globally, have we not? We can't just leave some people behind. And yet the UK doesn't seem to have much of an aid budget. And if it has, it gives it to corporates who go off to do more environmental degradation. I'm wondering whether the UN's been captured by the corporate sector. But on a positive note, could the cooperative movement start to link us all in, if we are all sustainable towns, into a wider network? We probably don't have anything that we could put to aid for other countries in our local budgets, but somebody's got to link it up, I think. That's my question.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next, Norman, fire away.
Yes, yeah, hello, yes, thanks. Extremely interesting to hear what's happening in Huddersfield and Newcastle and in Southwark. Each of these places obviously has clusters of people from all the various interest groups, the universities, business, education and so on. But I live in a village in Derbyshire. I'm just wondering, how can we get people involved in rural areas? Obviously, large percentage of the population lives in rural areas, not in the cities. How can we actually organize things in rural areas where we don't have access, easy access to all these interest groups? Thank you.
Thank you, great. Christopher Lavelle, fire away.
Good evening from sunny Glasgow. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, fire away, Chris.
Excellent. So I work for a company called Jacobs, and we're looking at how to develop our various kind of projects and deliver the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And one of the ways that we've managed to engage at local and national levels is through having networks of community of interest, as well as local champions in specialised areas. So whether that be energy production or food production, and basically that kind of comes together. So my question is to that effect: what will the co-op do, or how will the co-op establish this network if it's already there, and how will it promote that and engage its on the ground members to develop that network?
Thank you. Malcolm Wallace, very quickly please, fire away.
Yeah, it was all very inspiring stuff, but when you look at the reality and you look at the UN Sustainable Development Report, Cuba was actually ranked #1 in the world and the UK was 131. Now France and Belgium and New Zealand and China and so on all are better than us at doing it. So what lessons can we learn from countries like Cuba?
Thank you very much, Malcolm. That's the questions we've got. If I can go to Barry, Chris, Claire and Johnson in turn, and if I could ask you not to try and answer everything, but pick and choose maybe one question and keep your answers to 2 minutes if you can, please. Because if we go much over 7 o'clock, the meter runs out.
Can I have a quick word? Can I do the local and the international? Because I think they're both very good questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. First of all, in terms of the global, yeah, the United Nations is not a perfect body. It keeps trying, and the leadership, the millennium. Nothing wrong with the Millennium Goals, and they were outwardly focused, and the sustainable goals have a different framework, but we should be pursuing both. In fact, in the Parliamentary Labour Party, we are working very closely with the development team and the development focus with the DEFRA group, and so there's a mixing and matching in these things. So I don't underrate the international. Of course, I spend a lot of time, because I'm so enthusiastic about this, looking at Scandinavia, not just Cuba, because I think it helps. I believe policy should be based on good science, a good research. And what works in places like us. You've got to be careful who you're matching yourself against, but the Sustainable Development Goals do allow you to do that. And sometimes on some criteria, Cuba will come higher, and why not? It's got the best health system, and always has in South America, a lot better than the United States. Local's a really good question, Norman. You're going to have to, I'm afraid, you find out what your local people, what their expertise is, what their interest is. Do a little survey. What can you do that is something that'd be very different in a rural environment. But so much is going on in terms of and the new interest in flora and fauna and the relationship of human beings to the make them all look at the Autumn Watch and so on for inspiration. And Chris, what's his name? Chris Packham. But that's just a bit of a joke. But look, find out what your local people want and what energizes them. Because if you energize them, the health and well-being aspect of this is very important. And so is the thing I missed out. There's a really good group in Sheffield that I was talking to this week, said everything we call it justice is implied in all the Sustainable Development Goals. Justice. So even in your village communities, there'll be a lot of people struggling, obviously very brave and hiding the fact. Have an organisation that finds out who's struggling and how you help them.
Thank you so much. Chris, can you pick and choose a few questions to answer in 2 minutes?
Of course, James, absolutely, yes, yeah, and I appreciate time's tight. I think some superb questions and some very, very interesting points that were raised by everybody there. I think one of the threads that kind of comes through that really is, how do we engage with different stakeholder groups, different audiences, if you like, whether they be community, local, regional, national, potentially even international, but also certainly sort of business and local authority and other organisations. And that's actually one of my jobs within the Huddersfield Sustainable Town Group, in that what I'm doing is, at the moment, I'm auditing all our different groups, our different stakeholders. I'm looking at the best, most suitable kind of conduits, as it were, the channels to reach them with various messages, whether it be the hard yards of walking and doing surveys and chatting to people, or whether it's via social media, whether it's via broadcast media, local newspaper, radio, whatever it might be, blogs, etc., anything online, offline, and then looking at the appropriate messages to send to engage and to gain interest and to garner that enthusiasm as much as anything. So I think those are lessons we can kind of all learn, and I'm certainly learning as we go along by applying some of these kind of principles and thoughts and ideas. But happy to engage with people after the event and to share my thoughts as well, of course.
Thank you so much. Can I move on to Claire for 2 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you. I made some rough notes, but I might not have written them down properly about what people were saying. But for me, there is that bigger aspect of the international level, but there's also something around what you can do on a personal level. So what can you do? And by building upon what you can do, you can then you can engage with your family, you can engage with other family members, you can then build up from other family members to your workplace. You could look at where you work. Young children and young people can look at what they're doing in schools and start little groups. There were in Newcastle, we had someone who was really interested in making one of the areas of Newcastle plastic free. And so what they did was they decided to go out there and talk to all the businesses, talk to all the different workplaces. And it was just one person's idea to do that. And now we've got one part of our city, which is a plastic free zone. So I think, it only takes one person with one idea, just like we had Greta before, to actually do something. So don't feel like, oh, well, I'm in a rural area, or okay, saying these things at a big scale of communities. Actually, we can all do something if we start reducing and recycling ourselves, we start turning our heating down, you know, look at what we can do, and then share our knowledge, get on our Facebook, start on our social media and tell people what we are doing. And then that gets other people to think, well, what can I do? And we just slowly build it up. And then from that point, we can go from 1 person to 10 people to 20 people to 100 people, and we're all making a difference. So, and I think it's important. We've got trade unions involved. I mean, I'm a member of Unison as well as the Co-operative Party, and they're really big on doing stuff in their union and getting people in their workplaces to start doing stuff. So I think you can get political with it. When the person asked about politicizing, so you can go along to your cooperative Zoom meeting and say, I want to do this, how can we all get involved? You can go to your Labour, but if you're a Labour Party member, any kind of group that you're involved in, you can start saying, I'm going to do this, what are you going to do? How can you help me to achieve this?
Thank you so much. And Johnson, do you want to?
Yes, I get the joys of saying I agree with everything that's been said already. But on a serious note, just a couple of points. You know, just to echo what Claire was saying. Anything that we can do as individuals is really important, and something as simple as asking the questions. I think there is something about the values of social justice, and that applies anywhere, whether you're in a town, city, rural area, or a countryside or coastal town. A couple points. I think in terms of the opportunity for closer collaboration, I genuinely feel this conversation could be something to feed on from. I've certainly got a number of ideas and been able to hear from what's happening in Huddersfield, what's happening in Newcastle, also what's happening in Glasgow, Derbyshire as well. So these forums and partaking in forums like this will be important. And then just reflecting on the SDGs and the discussion around the UN more widely, and I think it was a theme through Cynthia's and also Malcolm's question. I think it's interesting to see a number of countries and cities actually start to weave in the SDGs in what they classify as good growth. And it's almost, when you start to do that, then you start to see the shift in how you're doing it against those SDGs as well. Far too often people see it as, you know, something that's benevolent and you're just parking it over there. But if you start to weave it into what you classify as growth, New Zealand has done it, you know, some Scandinavian countries have done it as well, then you start to see some of the shifts that we want to see, both in terms of climate action, but also ending child poverty, addressing some of the social justices that we all want to see addressed as well. You're on mute, James.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. It's a catchphrase of 2020, that, isn't it? What a brilliant note to end, good growth. I'd like to thank Barry, Chris, Claire, Johnson for just fascinating discussion, absolutely fascinating discussion. I'd like to apologise to Tracy and Bill for not being able to bring them in to questions. We have got a couple of questions, and hopefully we can gather those through our events at party.coop and then forward them on to you, because I get a sense actually in terms of discussion we could go on for another hour just by the people's hands are up and things like that. So on that note, thank the speakers for absolute brilliant presentations, and I hope everyone has a fantastic evening.